She arrived at the Kayapo settlement in a government pickup truck, covered by a thick shawl that hid almost everything except the very light hair that escaped around the edges. The Funai officials didn't even try to disguise their disdain. They whispered among themselves, laughed quietly, pointed. There was no formality, no respect, much less a gesture of farewell from the man who delivered her. It was her father, Colonel Mendonça, regional director of the indigenous agency, who was sending her to the tribe as punishment. Not for crimes committed, but out of shame. Since birth, Helena had been called a curse, albino, skin so pale, it seemed translucent under the merciless sun of Pará, eyes of a light blue that completely clashed with the Brazilian features of her family. In Marabá, the city where she grew up, no suitor wanted her. No gesture of affection was offered to her. And now, at 22, she was delivered as a wife to an indigenous warrior, like someone getting rid of an unwanted burden. In the village, the atmosphere was tense. The agreement between the tribe and the government was recent, fragile, stitched, together after years of conflicts over land demarcation. The presence of a white woman sent in that way reopened old wounds. Helena didn't say a word. She walked with her head down, trembling hands hidden inside her long sleeves. She expected contempt. She was used to it. She prepared herself to live. Among strangers with the same invisibility she had carried since childhood. The red earth dirtied her inadequate shoes as the small group crossed the circular village. Children stopped their games to observe her. Women suspended their basket-weaving work. There were 30 days until the evacuation of the area, 30 days until machines would arrive to prepare the ground for the hydroelectric dam. The agreement involved transferring the community to a smaller reserve, far from the sacred river. And now that strange woman with skin and hair too light was part of this arrangement. The warrior chosen to receive her didn't treat her as she expected. While everyone watched in silence, he approached with firm steps. Kawe was about 30 years old, with a strong body marked by traditional paintings, a penetrating gaze. He didn't question her about her name or origin. He showed no repulsion. He merely touched her light hair with his fingertips, a gesture as light as it was improbable, and looking at the cloudy sky, said in the Kayapo language a word that was translated, Jarina. Old Iracema, the village healer, gasped. The name wasn't casual. Jarina was what they called the white seeds that grew on the riverbanks during the rainy season, considered protective, used in sacred necklaces, symbolizing resistance and healing. By naming her thus, Kawe was not just offering her a name, he was granting her a place. That same night, the elder women came to the small hut where Helena, now Jarina, had been installed. They brought cotton threads, white seeds, urukum, for body paintings. They dressed her not as one would dress a prisoner or a stranger, but as part of something greater. No words of pity, only recognition. Jarina didn't understand everything, but she felt for the first time in her life that she didn't need to hide. In the first days, she spoke little. She moved with extreme caution, avoiding taking up space. But the children, they approached. First, out of curiosity about her hair and skin. Then out of genuine affection. Her calm way, her patient manner of observing, of trying to learn new words, of telling stories in a low voice, attracted the little ones like a safe harbor. Soon, parents allowed her to care for some during their absences for fishing or gathering. She taught simple songs in Portuguese. She learned Kayapo chants. She helped prepare the paintings for festivities. She made the children laugh when she tried to pronounce difficult words. The days passed and the threat approached. 25, 24, 23 days remaining. Engineers visited the area with increasing frequency, measuring, taking notes, ignoring the gazes of the indigenous people. Kawe participated in the village council meetings every night. He always returned more tense, more silent. He demanded nothing from Jarina. He didn't invade her space. But he always left small gifts at her cabin door. A macaw feather, a small basket woven with geometric designs, a hard-to-find fruit. It was a silent courtship, made of gestures, not words. On a particularly hot morning, while helping to care for the children near the river, Jarina noticed little Piatan, only 3 years old, moving away from the group. In seconds, he slipped on the steep bank and fell into the water. The panic was instantaneous. The current there was strong, treacherous. Without thinking twice, Jarina dove in. She swam against the force of the water, reaching the boy who was struggling. With one arm she held him firmly, with the other she fought to return to the shore. When she finally managed, exhausted, to deliver the child to the desperate mothers, she realized that her pale skin was marked by scratches and cuts from submerged branches, bright red blood against white skin. That night, for the first time, Kawe entered her cabin. He said nothing. He just knelt, prepared an herbal poultice, and with surprising delicacy in such calloused hands, treated each wound. Their eyes met. There was not pity, not desire, but recognition, equality. From that moment, something changed. The entire village called her by the name he had given. They never again used the white woman or any other term. Jarina became synonymous with unexpected courage. When a girl was born with a light spot on her skin, it was Jarina who took her in her arms before fear could set in. She said in the language she now learned with dedication, "Each mark brings a path. If we know how to read it, it guides instead of hurting." The phrase spread by word of mouth. The children repeated it. The elders nodded with approval. The countdown continued, relentless. 15 days. 14. The men of the village discussed resistance strategies. The women prepared for the worst. And in the midst of all this, Jarina found her place, not as Kawe's submissive wife, but as someone who built bridges between different worlds. On the 10th night, when only 20 days remained until evacuation, Jarina was invited to participate in a restricted ritual. Never before had an outsider been allowed in this ceremony. The moon was covered by dense clouds when Irasema came to fetch her. The old woman had a face marked by deep wrinkles, each telling stories of resistance. "Come," she said simply. Jarina followed her to a secluded clearing, where the main warriors and elders gathered in a circle. In the center, a low fire illuminated faces painted with sacred designs. Kawe was there, seated in a position of prominence. His eyes met hers for a brief moment. Old Irasema pointed to an empty place in the circle, and Jarina sat down, nervous, aware of the gazes that evaluated her. Chief Jurandir, of advanced age and respected wisdom, then spoke. "The river water gave us a sign. It received Jarina when she saved our little one. The spirit of the water accepted her blood in exchange for the life of our child." His voice was grave, laden with meaning. "The government gives us 20 days before taking us away from the river that has fed us since the world began. But the river has already made its choice." Jurandir raised a necklace of white seeds, authentic Jarina's, and held it out. "Those born different can see paths that our eyes do not see." Jarina then understood the weight of that moment. It wasn't just an acceptance ceremony, it was a request. They wanted her to be a link, a bridge between worlds. The woman who knew the thinking of white people, but whom the river had chosen as part of the tribe. As the necklace was placed around her neck, Jarina felt the weight of responsibility. In nearby huts, children slept confident that tomorrow would come. In the river waters, fish swam, ignoring that dams could dry up their world. In the ancient trees, birds built nests unaware that chainsaws awaited them. The ritual continued throughout the night. Jarina learned about the history of the Kayapo people, about their struggles, about the deep connection with that specific land. It wasn't just a piece of ground that could be exchanged for another. It was the place where their ancestors were buried, where each plant had a name and purpose, where the river kept secrets only they knew. At dawn, when everyone dispersed, Kawe remained. He sat beside her, watching the sun rise through the trees. "So you don't need to carry this weight," he finally said in careful Portuguese. "We're not asking you to betray your people." Jarina touched the necklace of white seeds. "My father delivered me here as if I were trash," she replied firmly. "You gave me a name, a place. Who are my people now?" The silence that followed was filled with the song of awakening birds. Kawe took her hand, the first deliberate touch between them, and turned it, palm up. With one finger, he traced a line cutting through the center. "The river," he explained, "it doesn't separate banks, it unites different worlds." In that moment, Something changed between them. It wasn't romantic love, not yet. It was something deeper, more essential, mutual recognition of shared purpose. 19 days. The engineers visited again, now accompanied by representatives of the construction company responsible for the hydroelectric dam. They walked through the village as if it were already theirs, measuring distances, marking points with colored stakes. One of them, seeing Jarina among the women of the tribe, frowned. "Hey, aren't you—" She straightened her shoulders, feeling the weight of the Jarina necklace against her chest. "I am Jarina," she replied in clear Portuguese. "I am with my people." The man laughed, incredulous. "People? You're white. What are you doing here in costume?" The children around her approached, clinging to her legs as if to protect her. The man made a dismissive gesture. "Whatever. In 2 weeks, all of this will be underwater anyway." His words were like stones thrown into calm waters. The circles of impact spread quickly. The reality of the deadline, the imminence of the loss, the certainty in his voice. Jarina felt something awaken inside her. Something she never knew existed. Determination. That afternoon she asked Kawe to take her to the nearest city. He hesitated, but eventually agreed. They took the village's only motorcycle, crossing dirt roads until they reached Altamira. While Kawe waited uncomfortably on the outskirts of the city, Jarina used the payphone to make a call. It was the first time she had contacted the outside world since her arrival at the village. "Aunt Cecilia, it's me, Helena." The voice on the other end of the line expressed shock, then relief. "My God, girl, we thought you were dead," your father said. "I need your help," Jarina interrupted. "Do you still work at the newspaper?" Cecilia was her late mother's sister, a respected journalist who covered environmental issues. The only person in her family who had always treated her with affection. "Yes, I do. What happened? Where are you?" "I'm where I finally found myself," replied Jarina, observing Kawe in the distance. "And I need you to come here with your camera and your recorder. There's a story that needs to be told before it's too late." On the way back to the village, with her aunt's promise to arrive in 3 days, Jarina felt the wind against her face as she held on to Kawe's waist. She didn't tell him about the phone call. Not yet. First, she needed to be sure her plan would work. 16 days. In the village, Jarina began to gather stories. With Irasema's help, she recorded in a worn notebook the accounts of the elders about the connection with the land, the legends of the river, the knowledge about unique medicinal plants of that region. She documented the names of children born there, the tombs of ancestors, the sacred places that would be submerged. Each story was a seed planted, each memory a link in the chain she was forging. At night, while everyone slept, Jarina stayed awake. The fear of failing consumed her. If she didn't succeed, it wouldn't just be her new family that would lose everything. It would be as if a part of the world disappeared forever, taking with it irreplaceable knowledge. On one of these nights, Kawe found her sitting by the river, eyes fixed on the water that reflected stars. He sat silently beside her. He didn't ask what she was doing or why she couldn't sleep. He just offered presence. "If I could change the color of my skin," Jarina finally murmured, "I would. Sometimes I still feel like an intruder." Kawe took a handful of red earth and, with deliberate gestures, drew a line on his own arm. "The earth doesn't ask what color we are before receiving us when we die," he replied. "And the river washed your blood and made it part of itself. Why should we be different?" The profound simplicity of those words touched Jarina as no elaborate speech ever could. Without thinking, she rested her head on his shoulder. It was the first gesture of intimacy she allowed herself. Kawe remained motionless for a moment, then put his arm around her. Not as a man desiring a woman, but as a companion offering safe harbor in a storm. The next morning, 13 days before the final deadline, Jarina woke to the sound of a helicopter flying over the village. Her heart raced. It was too early for removal. It couldn't be that. She ran outside, joining others who looked up with expressions of fear and anger. The helicopter landed in a nearby clearing. From inside it emerged the unmistakable figure of her father, Colonel Mendonça, followed by 2 men in suits. Jarina felt her legs weaken. She hadn't expected to confront him so soon, not before her plan was underway. But there he was, walking towards the village as if he owned everything, just like the engineers days before. The difference was that his eyes weren't measuring the land, they were looking for her. Colonel Mendonca's eyes found Jarina's among the crowd that was forming. For an instant, something like surprise crossed his severe face. Perhaps he expected to find her submissive, broken. Instead, he saw a woman standing, white hair braided with colorful threads, skin marked by the sun, firm gaze. Beside her, the children grouped like cubs protecting their guardian. Kawe and the other warriors formed a line in front of the village. They didn't wield weapons, but their postures made the message clear. She was one of them now. "Helena," called the colonel, using the name she no longer recognized as hers. "Come here." His tone was the same as always, an unquestionable order. Jarina didn't move. The men in suits beside her father seemed impatient. One consulted his watch. Another spoke on the phone in a low voice. "We need to talk in private," insisted the colonel, advancing a few steps. The tension was palpable. Jarina felt the hand of one of the children grab hers. It was Maira, the girl with the light spot on her skin. "Let's talk right here," replied Jarina, standing firm. "What you have to say can be heard by everyone." The colonel frowned, unaccustomed to being challenged, especially by the daughter he had always considered a disappointment. "The agreement has changed," he announced, looking beyond her to Chief Jurandir. "The deadline has been moved up. You have 5 days, not 13. Shock ran through the village like a wave. 5 days. There wouldn't be time for Jarina's plan. Her aunt wouldn't arrive in time. "That violates the signed agreement," argued Kawe, stepping forward. His Portuguese was simple but precise. "We have a document, we have rights." One of the men in suits smiled with disdain. "Documents can be revised when there is priority national interest. The company needs to begin construction before the rains." Colonel Mendonca observed the interaction with calculated interest. His eyes went from Kawe to Jarina, noting something that clearly bothered him. "Helena," he said more quietly this time, "don't tell me you really. With one of them?" The contempt in his voice was like poison. Jarina felt the blood boil in her veins. "My name is Jarina now," she replied, raising her chin. "And you lost the right to question any of my choices the day you delivered me here as merchandise." The colonel laughed, a humorless sound. "Always dramatic. I came to get you, actually. Your presence is complicating the negotiations." It was then that Jarina understood. It wasn't paternal concern that brought him there. It was fear that she, knowing both sides, could somehow hinder the plans. "I'm not going anywhere," she declared. Her father took a threatening step in her direction. "You will come with me even if by force. It's for your own good." Before he could take another step, Kawe moved, not aggressively, just positioning himself beside Jarina. A silent but unequivocal gesture. "She chose to stay," he said simply. The two men measured each other, the middle-aged military man representative of the power of the state, and the indigenous warrior, guardian of millennial traditions. Between them, Jarina, who didn't fully belong to either world, but who now built her own place. 5 days, the colonel finally repeated, retreating. "Not one more, and as for you, Helena, you'll regret this choice." The helicopter departed, leaving behind a cloud of red dust and a heavy silence. 5 days. The village council met immediately. Jarina was invited to participate, an unprecedented privilege for someone not born in the tribe. Kawe translated when the discussions became too technical for her limited knowledge of the language. The options were few and none good. To physically resist would mean confrontation with the police or the army. To yield would mean losing not just their homes, but their identity, their history. "My aunt is a journalist," Jarina finally spoke. All eyes turned to her. "She's coming here, but would only arrive in 3 days. I thought we could tell our story. Show Brazil what is being lost here." Chief Jurandir scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Words on paper don't stop machines," he observed with wisdom accumulated over decades of similar struggles. "Not alone," agreed Jarina. "But what if they weren't? Just words? What if we could show?" An idea was beginning to form in her mind. Something risky, But that might work. Something that would require everyone's participation. That night, as the village slept, Jarina and Kawe talked at length. For the first time, she told everything about her childhood of rejection, how she had grown up believing that her condition was a curse, how her father, a rigid and prejudiced military man, had hidden her from society, how her mother had died too soon to protect her, and how, ironically, by sending her to the village as punishment, her father had ended up giving her the only place where she had ever felt accepted. Kawe listened in silence. When she finished, he told his own story, how he had been chosen to receive her not by chance, but because he too carried a mark. He lifted his shirt, showing an old scar that ran across his chest, the result of a childhood accident that had almost killed him. The elders said I had two spirits, he explained, one that left and another that returned. That's why I understand what it is to be different. Under the starry sky, two beings marked by difference found mutual understanding. When the touch of their hands evolved into an embrace, and the embrace into a hesitant kiss, it wasn't due to the obligation of the agreement that had united them, but by choice. The next day, with only 4 days remaining, the plan began to take shape. Jarina gathered the children. With Irasima's help, she taught them to draw on large pieces of cloth. They weren't just any drawings, they were maps of the village, showing the sacred places, the medicinal trees, the ancestral paths that would soon be submerged. The warriors, led by Kawe, prepared something different. Using trunks and vines, they built a structure on the riverbank. The women separated seeds, fibers, ceramics, preparing an exhibition of the knowledge that would be lost. Each family contributed something. On the third day, when only 2 remained, until the fatal deadline, a jeep appeared on the dirt road. From it descended a middle-aged woman, grey hair tied in a bun, a camera hanging from her neck. Cecilia Montero, Jarina's aunt, had finally arrived. The reunion was emotional. Cecilia hugged her niece tightly, tears in her eyes. "I thought I had lost you forever," she murmured. "Your father said you had run away, then changed the story, saying he had sent you for treatment abroad." Jarina shook her head, not surprised by the lies. "He did send me away, yes, but he ended up sending me home without knowing it." Quickly, Jarina introduced Kawe and the others. She explained the urgent situation, the shortened deadline, the desperate plan they had developed. Cecilia listened to everything, her face transforming from shock to determination. "We need more visibility," concluded the experienced journalist. "One article won't be enough. We need something that no one can ignore." It was then that Kawe, who had been silent until then, spoke. "We have that." He took the 2 women to the riverbank, where the mysterious construction now took definite shape. It was a full-size replica of a traditional Kayapo house, but made entirely of floating materials. "When the water rises," he explained, "our house will not sink. It will stay above the waters as testimony to what was lost." Cecilia photographed everything: the floating house, the maps drawn by the children, the faces painted for ritual, the elders telling stories. She recorded testimonies, made frantic notes. "This deserves more than a newspaper," she murmured, thoughtful. "I know someone from TV who could—" That night, while the journalist made calls using the satellite phone she had brought, Jarina sat with Kawe by the river. In a day, perhaps 2, that place where they were would be swallowed by the waters. The same water that had accepted her, blood in exchange for Piatin's life, now threatened to take everything. "I'm afraid it won't be enough," she confessed, resting her head on his shoulder, "that no one will care about what happens here." Kawe intertwined his fingers with hers. "Even if the water rises," he replied, "what we built is not lost. Like the Jarina seed that survives even in the current." On the horizon, the sky began to darken with storm clouds. The rainy season was approaching, the same one that the construction company feared and used as justification to advance the deadline. Would nature be their ally or their enemy in the decisive days to come? The storm arrived in the early morning of the penultimate day. Heavy rain fell on the village, while Jarina, Kawe, Cecilia, and the elders finalized preparations. The deadline approached inexorably. Less than 36 hours remained before the machines would arrive. The journalist had achieved more than they had hoped. A television crew was on the way, delayed by the rain, but promising to arrive before dawn. Non-governmental organizations had been alerted. On social media, the hashtag #KayaPo was beginning to gain traction, even without images yet. The rain made the work more difficult, but no one stopped. Under improvised tarps, the women finalized panels with seeds and fibers that told the tribe's story. The men reinforced the floating house, now firmly tied to the riverbank, which was beginning to rise with the storm waters. The children, even, the smallest, helped as they could, carrying small objects, passing messages. Piatin, the boy Jarina had saved from drowning, didn't leave her side. Like a small shadow, he followed her everywhere, helping to translate words she still didn't know, explaining with childlike patience the deeper meanings of traditions. Around 4 in the morning, when the rain finally diminished to a constant drizzle, headlights cut through the darkness. They weren't the construction company's machines, it was still too early, but the television station's van. 3 journalists, a cameraman and a technician jumped out, protecting equipment from the moisture. Cecilia received them, quickly explaining the urgency of the situation. Meanwhile, Jarina and Kawe woke Chief Jurandir. The old leader seemed to have aged years in the last few weeks. The weight of responsibility for his people bent his shoulders, but his eyes still shone with fierce determination. "It's time," Jarina said gently, helping him to rise. The chief nodded, taking his ceremonial headdress, used only on occasions of extreme importance. Outside, the entire village gathered. News of the journalists' arrival had spread quickly. Men, women, children, elders, all dressed with traditional body paintings, feather adornments, seed necklaces. It wasn't a staging for the cameras. It was a final act of cultural affirmation. "If they're going to take us from here," declared Jurandir in his language, words that Kawe translated for Jarina and the journalists, "they will know exactly what they're destroying." The cameras began to record as the sky slowly cleared. The TV crew, initially skeptical about making such a long trip for just another indigenous story, visibly changed their attitude as they realized the magnitude of what they were witnessing. It wasn't just a village fighting for a piece of land. It was an entire world, with millennial knowledge about to be submerged. The live broadcasts began at 6 in the morning. Images of the village, the floating house, the maps drawn by the children, the elders showing medicinal plants that only existed in that region. And surprising even Jarina, Kawe stood in front of the cameras. The warrior, normally reserved, spoke with simple eloquence, alternating between his native language and careful Portuguese. "Our fight is not just for us," he explained. "It's for memory, for the knowledge we keep, for the water everyone drinks, for the forest that cleans the air everyone breathes." The reporter, visibly moved, asked the crucial question, "But the government says you'll receive new land. Why this resistance?" It was then that Irasema, the elderly healer, approached. Her frail body contrasted with the strength of her presence. In trembling hands, she carried a basket with white seeds, authentic Jarinas. "Ask a centennial tree if it can be transplanted," she replied through Kawe, who translated. "Ask a river if it can change its course. We are like these seeds, born to be where the water and land want us." The images spread throughout Brazil, in homes, offices, bus terminals. The story of the Kayapo invaded Brazilians' morning. On social media, the hashtag exploded. Celebrities shared. Politicians spoke out, some in favor of the hydroelectric dam, others demanding project revision. The controversy grew with each hour. Meanwhile, in the village, Jarina observed the movement with a mixture of hope and apprehension. 24 hours remained. The broadcast continued when, shortly after noon, the sound of helicopters cut through the sky. It wasn't just one, as in Colonel Mendonça's previous visit. There were 3 aircraft that landed in sequence in the nearby clearing. From the first, her father descended, accompanied by executives from the construction company and government officials. From the second, armed police, not for a confrontation, but clearly as a show of force. From the third, surprisingly, journalists from other media outlets, and 2 politicians known for defending indigenous causes. Jarina felt her blood freeze. The presence of additional press was good, but the anticipation of the authorities' arrival meant that the deadline had been altered again. 24 hours didn't remain. The moment was now. Kawe took her hand, squeezing it briefly, a gesture of shared strength. Together with Chief Jurandir at the front, they walked to face the newcomers. The cameras followed every movement. The confrontation that followed was broadcast live to millions of Brazilians. Colonel Mendonça, seeing his daughter hand in hand with Kawe, couldn't hide his repulsion. "Helena," he called, deliberately ignoring her new name, "get away from them. You don't belong in this place." Jarina felt anger grow inside her, but kept her voice calm. She knew that each of her words would be heard beyond that clearing. "On the contrary, Father, it's here that I finally found my place, where my difference isn't seen as a curse, but as a bridge." One of the construction company executives interrupted impatiently. "We have a schedule to meet. The evacuation order has been moved up to today. The machines are already on their way." The journalists recorded everything. The politicians who had arrived began to question the legality of the constant changing of deadlines. Voices rose. Tension grew. It was then that Pieta, the little boy saved by Jarina, escaped from the group of children and ran to the middle of the discussion. In his small hands, he carried one of the drawings made for the panels, the simple image of a village surrounded by water, with people holding hands on the shore. He stopped in front of the colonel and extended the drawing. "For you," he said, in childish Portuguese, "so you don't forget." The unexpected gesture silenced everyone. The cameras focused on the poignant contrast, the small indigenous child offering a gift to the man who had come to displace him. The colonel looked at the drawing, at the boy, and then at Jarina. Something in his face changed. It didn't completely soften, but a crack appeared in the armor of certainty. It was the moment Cecilia had been waiting for. She advanced with her recorder. "Colonel Mendonça, do you believe this hydroelectric dam justifies the destruction of an entire culture, including the community that welcomed your own daughter when you rejected her?" The question, harsh and direct, captured by all the cameras present, put the military man in an impossible position. Any answer he gave would be devastating, for the project or for his reputation. As he hesitated, a distant noise caught everyone's attention, the rumble of heavy engines approaching. The machines had arrived. The decisive moment was upon them. It was when Kawe made a gesture to the men of the village. As if they had rehearsed 1,000 times, they ran to the riverbank. The women took the children to the floating house, carrying the panels, seed baskets, musical instruments. In minutes, the entire village transferred to the structure built over the waters. "What are they doing?" asked one of the executives, confused. Jarina, still beside Chief Jurandir, replied clearly, "You can flood our land, but you won't sink our culture." The cameras captured the extraordinary image, an entire village transferring to an artificial floating island, children, elders, warriors, all together in a final act of peaceful resistance. Meanwhile, on social media, the broadcast was breaking audience records. Comments flooded the platforms. Phones rang in offices in Brasilia. All of Brazil watched the drama in real time. The machine stopped at the entrance to the village. The operators, seeing the cameras, hesitated. No one wanted to be the national villain at that moment. Colonel Mendonça, realizing that the situation was spiraling out of control, tried to regain authority. "This is a publicity stunt," he accused. "You're manipulating public opinion with sentimentality." One of the politicians who had arrived in the helicopter intervened. "What I see is a people defending their existence with dignity, and a project being imposed without due respect for constitutional rights." The discussion intensified. More helicopters arrived, now from other TV stations. The Kayapo case was becoming the topic of the moment throughout the country, and, while the authorities argued, the floating village organized itself. Above the waters of the river that threatened to swallow them, a symbol of resistance arose that no one had foreseen. At the end of that extraordinary day, as the sun began to set, news arrived via radio. The Federal Public Ministry had secured an emergency injunction suspending the works for 30 days for a complete reassessment of the environmental and cultural impact of the project. It wasn't a definitive victory, but it was time. Time that, hours before, had seemed impossible. In the floating village, fires were lit. Traditional songs rose above the waters. The children danced. The elders smiled. A celebration not of complete triumph, but of immediate survival. On the shore, the machines remained silent. Most officials and executives had departed, leaving only a reduced team to monitor the situation. The cameras continued broadcasting, now showing life adapting, resisting, flourishing even in the face of adversity. Jarina and Kawe watched hand in hand. The future was still uncertain, the fight wasn't won. But something had fundamentally changed that day. The story of a small people and their land had touched the heart of a nation. "Your name was prophetic," Kawe said softly. "Jarina, the seed that floats on the waters, resisting the current, finding new soil to grow." She smiled, squeezing his hand. "It wasn't the name that changed me. It was finally finding my place. People who saw beyond my appearance." In the distance, Colonel Mendonça observed the scene. He hadn't approached his daughter again after the public confrontation, but his gaze no longer carried just contempt. There was something else, perhaps confusion, perhaps the first seed of understanding. When his helicopter finally took off, Jarina didn't feel triumph over her father, just the certainty that, by rejecting his daughter for being different, he had lost something precious. And she, in the loss, had found an entire world. In the weeks that followed, the Kayapo village became a national symbol. Jarina, with her unique story, became an involuntary spokesperson for causes greater than herself: environmental preservation, indigenous rights, acceptance of difference. The hydroelectric dam project wasn't definitively cancelled, but it was substantially modified. The new proposal preserved the sacred land of the village, diverting the main course of the dam. It was a partial victory, but significant. And as for Jarina and Kawe, their relationship flourished not as an imposed arrangement, but as a deliberate choice of two beings who found in each other the reflection of their own journeys. When a daughter was born to them a year later, she had her father's brown skin and small light spots like her mother, a child of two worlds. They named her Iara, in honor of the elder who had first recognized Jarina's potential as a bridge between cultures. In the birth ceremony, old Chief Jurandir raised the child to the sky and declared, "Just as the Jarina seed floats on the waters, to find new land, our people navigate over changes to continue existing. This child carries our future." Years later, when the girl Iara grew old enough to understand, Jarina took her to meet her grandfather. Colonel Mendonça, then retired and aged, received them with initial hesitation that gradually dissolved upon seeing his granddaughter, living proof that differences can create beauty instead of division. There were no great emotional declarations, no instant forgiveness for decades of rejection, but there was a beginning, a small recognition that the world is too big to be seen through a single lens. And perhaps, thought Jarina, as she watched her daughter playing in the yard that had once been her own place of solitude, that is the true victory. Not completely changing the other, but creating space for change to happen, like a planted seed that grows in its own time. On full moon nights in the Kayapo village on the banks of the preserved river, the elders still tell the story of the white-haired woman who came as a foreigner and became a savior. The children listen with wide eyes, learning that differences are not curses, but possibilities. And when travelers ask about the floating house that still remains anchored in the river as a monument, the inhabitants smile and answer, "It is our reminder that even when the waters rise, we can choose to float instead of sink." If this narrative touched your heart, don't let it just float like a seed in the current of time. Make it grow. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share in the comments which moment moved you the most. Just as Jarina built bridges between